Okay, so that's how the Cosmere ends.
Oh my God.
Oh, hi, are we live?
Chill.
Welcome to the third and final episode of the book club for Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. I'm Emily Sanderson, your host for this last and final time, and here are our guests.
I'm Tim. I'm an author, but you might know me better as Hello Future Me on YouTube.
I'm Bethany. I'm Bethany's Books on TikTok.
I'm Jackson Dickert. I'm an author and I work at Campfire.
I'm Tran, and I'm a freelance illustrator.
We wanted to start out this episode. Tran has some goodies for us. We are really pleased that she was able to come and to bring some things to show us. Tran has a great following in her own right, but she was asked to do the cover for Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, the commercial edition. Brandon, we did our Kickstarter edition, but Brandon wanted to make sure that anybody who wanted to buy this book would have an opportunity. So we sold the rights to Tor, and they did a commercial edition that, unfortunately, we don't have copies yet. But Tran's cover was amazing, and we were so thrilled to get her. So we wanted to kind of have her talk to us a little bit about cover art. This whole book has been talking about art and how it relates to our lives, and here we have a visual artist with us. So is there anything you can tell us about the cover art for Yumi in specific and kind of creating cover art in general?
Sure. So I was really excited when I got this project because not only is it a beautifully woven story, but the two main characters are Asian, so that's not always the case in my line of work, so it felt even more personal to me. But for this cover, I worked with Peter at Tor Books, and then I worked with Isaac at Dragonsteel. And what I wanted to focus most for this illustration was the convergence of these two worlds, Yumi's world and Painter's world. And to showcase that to the viewer, I wanted to play a bit with negative space so that a bit parts of Yumi is bleeding into Painter, and there's not like a exact delineation between the two, so you can't really quite tell when where Yumi ends and where Painter begins. And for me, that's my depiction of conveying these two characters as their own, but also as one unity. So, and this is the final sketch. This is what is used. I blow this up, I print it out, and then I trace this, and then this is what the final is made from. So I usually just start with a red pencil, and then I go over with graphite. And these are two of the other sketches. I sent the art director 3 different options, and these two were the 2 that weren't picked. So I'm always interested in what the art director decides to feel is best, and I'm really happy they decided that. So.
Oh, those are so cool.
Oh, thank you.
Can we please get more versions, more covers?
Yeah.
Have a whole collection of Yumi books with different covers.
It's really fun to see different interpretations. And I get to see some of the sketches that don't make it to the final, so that's one of the fun things about my job, at least the books that we do. I don't get to see tours, but the books that we do, I will go and be like, all right, what are all the options? And that's always fun because there's so many different interpretations and it's hard to just choose one. But I love that kind of Painter and Yumi being two separate individuals, but in this story, they do kind of, their worlds bleed together and they become one unit in a way, so. Go ahead.
If I could ask, you have these kind of like rejected pieces, and I don't know if you know why they were rejected, or if there are certain trends in kind of cover art at the moment that you kind of have to learn and be aware of. Like we go through kind of things of like big bold faces or big bold titles. Is that sort of something that you are aware of when you're creating the cover art?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of trends. I think a couple of years ago, blue had been a really prominent color in a lot of the books. I don't know how that got started. And then I started noticing a lot of the covers I was doing, the art director would want to give blue a try. With creating cover art, I think the thing I try to keep in mind the most is I don't want to make the art director's job more difficult. So I have to make sure there's enough negative space or an area for the type, the author's name, because when everything's just cluttered, it's going to fight against that type. So that's something I really have to keep in mind. But
Which is interesting. That's very different in doing a cover and doing your own fine art pieces, which I know you do both. So.
I do.
Is there advantages and disadvantages to one over the other for you?
Like personal gallery work versus commercial.
Yeah.
They have their both of their cons and pros. With gallery work, it's personal. It's my story that I'm filling into the paper. But with commercial, I get to work on someone else's story and I get to bring it to life and I get to collab. It's more of collaborated thing. So they're both wonderful in their own way.
Seems like nice to be able to do both.
It is nice. I think these days we're not pigeonholed. Artists in general aren't pigeonholed to gallery work is gallery work. If you're a fine artist, that's what you do. And then commercials, what you do. And if advertising, that's what you do. I feel like with social media and technology, it's made it easy where you can like jump and kind of cross-pollinate through all these different markets and industries.
And I feel like in the past it was, you're a cover artist as like almost an apprenticeship until you can do your own gallery work. And I don't think it's that way anymore. I think covers are just as much fine art as art that's hung in a gallery. And it's so much fun because you see, especially sci-fi fantasy covers, there's so many just beautiful, beautiful covers that I want to just hang the book jackets on my wall.
Literally working with artists is like the favorite part of my job. I've got 2 cover artists doing work for me right now.
Nice.
And like, what you guys do is just, it's phenomenal. It's insane. It's incredible.
I can't write, so I feel the same way.
Yeah, I can't paint or write, but I can read.
Me too, yeah.
And how hard is it to defeat the nightmares?
To
real
be continued. I'll get back to you.
But we're so glad to have Tran here. I think her particular style really fits with this book.
Yes.
And I know we'll put up on the YouTube channel her cover that she did for tour so people can see it. But it will be available also end of the month, I think they told us. I don't remember for sure. But in any case, I'm glad I got to see it first. And we can just kind of talk about the end of Yumi. I feel like I don't want it to be the end. Can you guys like come to my book club every month?
Yes, please.
Yes, that'd be great.
Check my schedule.
See if you can fit it in.
It's, I don't know, something talking about books. It really enhances my enjoyment of them. When Brandon did the secret projects, then he gave them all to me first. Like Secret Project 1 was my Christmas present. And then I can't remember, it was my birthday and Mother's Day, and one of them he just couldn't wait. And so he just slapped a manuscript on the bed and I walked in there and said, another one? But after he gave them to me, he's like, and you don't have to share these with anybody. You can just keep them all to yourself. And for a second, I was kind of tempted because I could see in his eye he had this grand plan. But what's the fun in that? If you don't get to talk about books with people and share them with people, then they're not nearly as much fun.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you
Yes.
so much for sharing them with all of us.
But does that mean that Sanderson has canonical Cosmere books that that he would never release? Because these are Cosmere books which he gave to you, and there was the option that they would never be published, meaning that there are canonically Cosmere books.
I'm sure there are in his head.
Like,
But I think now anything he writes may not start out as Cosmere, but the Cosmere just kind of worms its way into
always
that
gets-
story, which is really fun.
Can you talk a little bit more about what was that like? Did you have any idea? I know it's secret, but was he being a little more secretive about what he was working on lately, or
The first
what was this
one, the
experience?
first secret project, Tress, I knew he was writing. And this was during COVID, and so all of his events got canceled, and he had more time on his hands. And so he told me he was writing this book. We talked about The Princess Bride. We watched The Princess Bride with our kids and talked about it. And some comments that I made kind of made a seed for this book. And so he would come and read to me at night before I went to sleep the parts that he'd written. And then he just stopped. And I thought, oh, he must be getting busy with his contract projects and just isn't writing this anymore. And then Christmas morning, I open up this box and there's a stack of paper like this because it's manuscript form, which is a lot of space, larger font. And I was just thrilled. Like, that's the best present ever for me, is a book, my own book. So of course I went immediately and read it, which reading a book in manuscript form is kind of hard to do. I have a new respect for editors who've ever had to do that. You can read the page and then flip it onto the floor. But Brandon knew when he wrote Yumi, this was an Emily book. Frugal Wizard, I enjoyed very much. But after I read this one, it was my book. So
Can you talk about why? Like, what made it your book as opposed to Chess?
well, I think people often think, oh, you must be interested in Asian culture or, anime or manga or, K-dramas or something. And I'm really not. That's more a Brandon thing. But I love a good romance. I wouldn't say I'm a romance reader per se, but I love a good romance, and it has to be well done. And I'd been talking to Brandon about some books I'd been reading and talking about the love at first sight trope and how ridiculous that was and those kind of things. So he was kind of doing an experiment with all of these secret projects, seeing how can Hoyd tell these stories? How do I write Hoyd's voice in a way as practice for when he wants to write Hoyd's backstory? And then he's like, can I write different types of books? He has elements of romance in his books, but can he write a romance novel? And he read a bunch of manga. He shared some of them with me. It's pretty funny. Some of those that he found and just kind of looked at that and was like, all right, what works and what doesn't and why? And why do people put certain things in a book? And he knew that I would just love it. So I'm sitting on the bed reading the end of this book, and he's next to me listening as I'm laughing and crying and, reacting. And then we get to the very end and he's like, okay, it's all done. Goodbye. And takes it away from me. I just about ripped his face off because, take away that's been a joke of ours for a long time. But that was the fun thing, is to get to the end and then we'll have to talk about it and see, what did you guys think of the end? So
Are we jumping into that now?
I'll let you guys go first.
Losing my train of thought.
There's so many parts to the end.
yeah.
Yes.
No. So speaking of anime, this when I was reading this, I was absolutely I was imagining an anime playing through as this book is going. And one anime that this reminds me of is, as far as the love story, the whole, you start out bickering, there's a little bit of hate, but then over time, you come to get to know each other and love each other. There's an anime called Escaflowne. It's the love interest is between Hitomi and Van, and they start out, disliking each other, and then they are put in situations constantly where they have to save each other and rely on each other, and over time they learn to understand. And ultimately, in the end, as soon as they have their moment of embrace, she has to go back to her world, and the other stays in his. And I thought it was beautiful because Brandon mentions how sometimes the ending has to be a sad one because it makes it real. And I thought that was really beautifully put.
And at the end he talks about your name, and I really liked. He did the same thing that your name did, sort of, where when the first time you watch your name at the end, you stand up and you scream at your TV and you're like, no, absolutely not. When you think you're gonna pass each other, and it was the same thing here. Like, no. Yeah, I would have been screaming at my TV.
Yeah.
So
that was the part where we took the book away.
No.
Yes.
Did he really?
Yes.
It's a miracle he's
Wait, so
alive.
did it not have the ending yet?
It did, but he didn't let me read it. He's like, that's the end. Okay, bye-bye. So before I read the epilogue.
No, when I read that first ending before the epilogue, I was like, this was foreshadowed. I should have seen it coming with the TV show. And I was so angry. It was I know that like a lot of people liked that ending, maybe even better than the happy ending, but I love happy endings. So the epilogue made it for me. That was my favorite for sure.
I'm a sad endings reader.
are, okay.
I'm a sad endings writer and a sad endings reader. So when they were separated, I was like, oh yes, exactly how the story should end. But I mean, I loved this. I mean, what's the final line? I need to find it. But basically, when he brings her back, it's basically through force of will, you know. And you can call it magic, you can call it investiture. But I mean, I read it as basically we will things into existence with art in a sort of way, you know. And it's sort of this analog for how they bring themselves closer to each other. You know, art does that. And even though this is bringing a person back to him, they were doing the same thing when they were you know, when they do art. We bring things into existence that actually affect people, that actually matter, that, you know, in a weird sense, change reality. You know, we manufacture reality in the art we make. And I know this sounds like romantic pomp, but it's true in a weird way. And I love that about art. I love it. And so that was my reading of the ending. It's like kind of this culmination of like art is changing the world.
If you do want the sad ending, though, you just think about the story from the perspective of the scientists who are about to get their spaceship stolen by Hoyt.
Yeah, I know.
So imagine working so hard on that and then gone.
Now, do you think Painter was like painting the mural hoping that would be the case, or was he inspired by like everything and
I don't
finally
know.
had
I don't know
his-
if he hoped or if he had any, but I mean, that's
If that was his creative
how
outlet
you
to deal
call
with.
spirits is
Yeah.
through art. And so that's what Yumi had become at that point. And
I had interpreted that as him trying to capture her from how he remembers, and this is the only way he can. So he has to do it before his memory starts, you know, over time
love
fading.
that.
So,
That's
but
amazing.
I love that she did, you know, come back to him.
That's so cool. I like that. I didn't think of that.
Here's the quote, by the way. At the end of it all, when someone finally thought to check on him, they found Painter huddled against the wall beneath a masterpiece of incredible caliber, holding a young woman tight in his arms, as real as anyone else, because she wanted it to be. And like, so you've got this parallel of a masterpiece of incredible caliber with a real person, and that it happened because she wanted it to be.
Was the masterpiece of incredible caliber the art, or was it her?
Well, yeah, that's
the question.
That's the question. So I was just like, that parallel is really great, and I love that expression at the end. Yeah.
I also really liked, you know, they talk a lot about my world, my rules. And at the end, they say our world, our rules, you know, and that's the part where I cried.
Yes.
The part that actually got me the most was when he was talking to Leon earlier and was like, take her this painting. And he was like, you serve the Yoki Hija. I was like, oh, that got me. I don't know why that was what I was, but I was like, oh, that was when she got redeemed. I was like, okay, fine.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny because you have, I think you almost need both of these things, but you have the heart-wrenching, almost too saccharine sweet romance thing that you want to say it's cringy, but it's not. It just is so wonderful. And then you have Hoyt and design and all of these silly things. That's very Brandon too, is this thing is emotional and deep. And so say something funny to kind of distract people from it, and which I'm grateful for. It's hard to be vulnerable and emotional, you know? And I'm glad for the humor to break things up a little bit.
My favorite line in the whole book. Hang on, it's right here. It's right here. It's right here. Is when he said, like a man with diarrhea in a sandpaper factory. Sometimes all available options are less than ideal. That was, people sometimes criticize Brandon's prose, but there's nothing to criticize
I agree.
in that. Perfect. I got a good laugh out of it.
And that was one of those Hoyt lines that probably should have been taken out.
No.
But no.
it's
No.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I mean, Sanderson is a very optimistic writer. you can call it a response to kind of a lot of the grim, dark fantasy that has become very popular. But I mean, there's a line at virtually the beginning of the book where he says, sad stories can sometimes be an excuse to hide our cynicism. And so something that was very apparent to me as I was reading this is that it very much fit within kind of the ethos there of kind of this optimism that sad stories can be sometimes important, like Hoyd basically says as much, but they don't, that the optimistic stories are also very important. Stories of heroism and valor and love and connection, which are just constant themes, in his stories. It's the struggle, but it's usually an arc towards a higher and greater good.
I think in the end, that's why this is an Emily book, because it needed the sad ending. That's, I've been told, kind of a part of Japanese storytelling, at least, where that's a lot more common than it is. It needed the sad ending, and it had the sad ending, but that wasn't exactly the ending.
He got the double dip.
Yes. and that, if he'd been trying to write the true literary masterpiece, he wouldn't have put the epilogue in there. But I wouldn't have enjoyed it nearly as much without that epilogue. So
Yeah.
I have a lot of world building questions that I won't bring up here, but
This is your shot, mate.
Yeah.
This is your shot. We haven't had many world building questions. So
he's gonna raffle me. I feel like he's gonna raffle me.
gleefully.
Okay, Brandon. Who or what awakened the father machine? Was it the same system that we've seen with breaths, or was it something else? How did someone, if it is breaths, how did someone who can use that magic system, how did they get here? And I got questions, Brandon.
So, these all work on the same fundamental mechanics. You should not be looking for someone from outside to have done this.
for the record, by the way, the quote on the back, a person is more than their experience stacked up stones. Our best moments are foundations we use to reach for the sky. Like very symbolic, like summary line Sanderson's work. Yeah.
Uplifting, literally. Reach for the sky.
Yeah.
I will say of the book, so towards the end, Hoyd does, or I guess Sanderson, does a bit of a thing where he sort of summarizes the themes of the story and kind of, like, he gives you kind of the exposition of like, all right, oh, here we go. All right, at this point, some of you might be confused. Here's exactly what happened. I think for me personally, I would have preferred if like some of the thematic messaging was left out and kind of left up to interpretation a little bit. Just because, like, the discussion of what the father machine is and what it can do and the events of the story, the role it plays, I was like, yeah, there's a lot of meaning to draw out of there.
You didn't quite want it spoon-fed to you.
No, I'm not. I don't. I'm not. I like kind of those a bit more interpretive stories in that sort of sense.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's an Emily book as well. Because the first didn't have quite as much of that, and I was like, what is going on here?
I appreciate it too.
Because I need a little more spoon feeding than some.
And that's fine.
But yeah, it is interesting how if something is explained to you, then you can't quite interpret it for yourself.
Yeah.
We do it anyway. We reject that explanation and come up with what we think it should be. But
This was one, and people probably want it all the time, but I don't think people say it a lot. This was one I think could have been a little longer, actually. Like that last 20% felt like it could have been a whole book on its own.
it was a lot. It
happens,
was it was a bit much to take in all at once.
And that's what
the pacing was a little hard on the end.
I think the cognitive load on that pacing is why, Hoyd ends up being like, okay, guys.
I got to summarize.
That's fair.
A lot of strings to suddenly pull together.
Yes.
Because it's so hard when you're writing to know what people can figure out. I'm running a D&D campaign right now, and I was like figuring out all the mystery and stuff like that. And I'm looking at it, and I've got a document which is the players should know by this point these things. And they're at this point, and they're like, we have no clue, no idea. And
You're like, okay, back to
it's
the beginning.
because you have no idea what's obvious and because you're reading through your work going, well, of course it's this. What else could it possibly mean? But then they're like, you know, you have no idea what people are going to take out of your story and what's obvious to them. And what's the big thing when you're writing is you don't know what they're going to notice is important, right? Or whether it's just like a sideline detail. So that's why beta readers and stuff are like so helpful, because they will point that stuff out to you. But it's so hard to see it as an author.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've often felt comfort that, you know, because oftentimes in writing group, other writers are reading this and responding as writers. And I'm like, okay, you need somebody to respond as just your general dumb reader and tell you what needs to be spoon-fed. And so that's been my role, which I appreciate. So that's kind of why, in some ways, this is an Emily book. It has a happy ending, despite not really, you know, it probably shouldn't have because of the type of story it is, but it does.
It does kind of foreshadow the happy ending too, though, because the TV show doesn't actually end where we thought it ended. We're told that that person ends up coming back. So like when the sad ending happened before the epilogue, I was like, I should have seen this coming. And then when the happy ending came, I was like, I should have seen that coming, because they were both kind of foreshadowed.
Yeah, I suppose. And with like you know, the characters never stay dead kind of thing that you see a lot in K-dramas and anime and stuff like that. Yeah, I didn't. I'm blind, clearly.
I have a trouble when I read a thriller. I'm always looking for like the twist, and I'm trying to predict it. But with a fantasy, I feel like I'm just so trusting. I'm like, whatever you tell me is fact, and I'm not going to question it. And so I feel like I need to be a little bit more suspicious when I read Brandon's books, because there always are things.
There's always going to be something.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do wonder, like, the other Yoki Hijo, what happened to them?
13 other ones of them? Yeah.
Are they?
There were 14 of them total.
Oh, well, yeah. Because I also initially was thinking that they were going to be the splinters of virtuosity. But then they ended up, I think that was just ended up being the spirits. But I'm curious what happened to
When the machine
other
died, I think they all were like finally freed, and so they like their spirits dissipated.
But did they get taken by the father machine too? Because
they all had their like own little world, so they were all under like having the same thing happen to them as Yumi was.
They all got trapped in their own cycles, and then but the machine couldn't destroy the Yoki Hijo, so they trapped them. And then once the machine was destroyed, they basically dissipated, including Yumi.
And it's her connection.
It's only it's only her connection to pain that brings her back. So unlucky for the other 13.
Well, they said that they were satisfied because they finally had peace.
Oh, yeah.
So it was still happy, because that could have been a really sad part, but it was satisfying for them because they.
Well, and I think there's if I can find the line where she kind of felt the other Yoki Hijo go dissipate and be free, and then she did too. If I remember, the machine they created, they told it to draw spirits so that they could have, you know, energy, perpetual energy. And the machine was like, well, I can't draw spirits unless I have some fuel. Yo, you guys, all of these people on this planet, your souls are fuel. Which is really gross when you think about the shroud and what that meant and Hoyt's explanation of it. But the Yoki Hijo, because they were so invested, they got put into the shroud and refused to stay there. They would come back. And so that's why the machine had to create their little prisons, because they were so invested that they wouldn't stay dead.
Yeah, the machine didn't have much power over them. Instead, it could only erase the one day. Even towards the end, the scholars were talking about like, oh, can we erase like the last 30 days or some amount? And it didn't even have the power for that. So it had very little it could control over Yumi. And so it kind of maximized that by repeating that one day and changing all of the environment to make sure that it seemed like a realistic day. So she wasn't questioning it, because she had so much power if she knew what was going on.
And since the shroud was like pure investiture, like the mist is in Mistborn, Hoyt mentioned, you know, you can burn 10 to like see through it, which I have so many questions about that. Like the implications are really interesting.
Well, and the whole virtuosity splinters and all of that kind of stuff, there's all kinds of stuff going on here.
Right.
That, like you say, are not necessary for this story, but still, you just want
Yes.
This is random, but there's a scene where there was a nightmare, and Painter didn't have a paintbrush, and he just like reached out to the side, and like a paintbrush appeared, and there was like a flash of light. And like, I need details, because that seems so much like a sharp paintbrush.
Yeah.
I mean, this is also working under the exact same mechanics. So yes, investiture that he is connected to. is indeed being manifest as something physical.
Because I think something that we didn't talk about at all is like Painter's like magic system. Like, is he doing investiture, when he's painting these, and like, does that have implications elsewhere? And it was, it was funny the whole time. Yumi kept being like, yeah, it feels like something is taken away from me whenever I'm stacking these rocks.
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to understand better if his was a true magic system or if it was more of a quirk and a flaw in the nightmares themselves.
Right.
I think design says that he doesn't have investiture.
Or
This is his low investigation.
Like a normal,
Yeah,
a normal
normal,
level,
yeah.
like normal human level.
And
you're
Yumi's just
right.
off the charts.
Because everybody has investiture, but yes,
Yeah.
like just average level.
Yeah. Did anybody catch, do you remember when the spirits were first called, how they were described? Like what
like
colors they were?
teardropped in red and blue.
Yeah.
Not red and blue. I think.
Oh, there was. I got that like immediately that clearly they're connected to the Hoyon stuff, but I mean I don't know how.
Yeah.
And there's also another moment of that. Blue and magenta appears a few times in Yumi's world in ways which you're like, there's some connection.
When he
here.
started turning to like smoke, like they started pulling him into the machine, and he started turning into smoke. It like briefly became like
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something going on there.
something going on. He knows things.
But it's interesting. You've got the red and blue, and then you've got the Heion colors, and it's the spirits, however it is. I'm glad Brandon probably has this all figured out in his head, but I'm glad he didn't explain it in this book, because I would have been like, how that all works in the investiture. And we have a whole team of people to figure that out and make it work. So
Yeah, and it was about them. It's not about the Cosmere or anything. It's about them. And I like that it was about them.
yeah.
I loved the battle scene at the end of like these
yeah.
artists
Oh,
like
Yes.
spinning around and like trying to create art out of nothing. I had this image in my head, which I know is incorrect, but like, those perspective paintings or perspective art where there's lots of different pieces, and only when you stand at a certain perspective, like usually far back or at an angle, you can see through and all the things line up, and that's like the image. For some reason I was imagining like the artist like running around and they're like paint in the air, and then they'd stand in a certain place and it would line up, and then they would like bring the nightmare down or something. But I just loved the idea of like people doing art to bring down these stable nightmares and stuff like that. It's great.
And to make it sound cool too, stacking
Yeah.
rocks and painting to make that sound cool and with words, it's difficult.
Yeah.
So another major part of the ending is the Dreamwatch, and
Yeah.
the reveal that it's like politics.
The heroes are not very heroic.
Yeah.
They're playing ping pong and reading books, taking naps.
That one didn't catch me off guard. Like I wasn't like, shocked, but I didn't predict it either. I was just like, it tracks. It
I
tracks.
didn't expect a social commentary on, because they're privileged, right? They're from families with wealth and connections. So I wasn't expecting that kind of commentary from the Dreamwatch.
Yeah.
I will say I did enjoy that in that moment, Painter, when he got turned down and was told you're not going to have a chance at that point to be in the Dreamwatch, he asked about his friends. Because up until that point, I was a little skeptical on how much Painter grew from the story. Yumi, we saw so much growth, but Painter had made a mistake in the past of deceiving all his friends. And then with Yumi, he kind of did it again. And so that to me was a little frustrating, so he didn't learn his lesson. But I felt like I did see that growth in that scene where he cared more about his friends, because he first thought like that he might be asking like, oh, but like, can I still have a chance? But instead he thought to ask, can my friends have a chance? Because they deserve it.
Staring at a wall. That was funny. With the Dreamwatch and kind of this, I don't know how intentional this was, but there is kind of this reveal that you don't really get into the Dreamwatch purely based on your skill. It's based on your connections, and it's based on kind of like what the market's looking for, kind of thing. They may be plucking out certain types of people, certain types of styles, stuff like that. And I sort of feel kind of worried about that when it comes to like being an author in the real world in some sort of sense. That's sort of how I sort of read it in a way, is that I see like agents and publishers being like, yeah, we're not really looking for like grief people right now. Like, it doesn't matter. Great books that are based around grief or like, like really dark emotions or anything like that. That's just not where the market is. It's not what agents and stuff are looking for. And like my book is like very much all that. And I'm like, oh, so it doesn't matter how good my book might be. I might have a pretty hard time finding someone for this, you know? And it's kind of one hard part of being an artist is that sometimes your passion and your skill is not directly correlated with how well you do in the real world.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of factors in that,
Yeah. You have to think about how you actually define success.
Yeah, definitely.
And Painter, like, he let that define him. They said, you're not good enough to get into the Dreamwatch. And so he just said, I'm not a good artist.
Yeah.
And let that define him when that wasn't the truth at all, you know?
He did put a lot of value in like what other people told him about his art. Like he, which there's nothing wrong with that. He really loved his friends being able to enjoy his art rather than just himself. And so losing like his friends' perspective on it, and then being told again with not being able to join the Dreamwatch, I think it really did shut him down. And that's why he fell into just like painting bamboo, just not feeling as good about what he was doing.
It makes you think about the confidence or lack thereof that, negative comments or positive comments can have on people. I think especially with creative endeavors, because like Painter said, you rip open your soul and share it, and then someone's like, it's okay.
Yeah.
It makes it hard. But really, when it came down to it, he had to create art because he wanted to. And
learning how to do that is hard. We grow up with structures around us that mark what counts as success in the creative world. And it's really hard to get to a point where you can tell yourself, I'm happy with what I'm doing because of what it is to me and what I feel like I've accomplished, rather than how many views I've got, how many people have seen it, how many people buy my stuff. It screws with your mind because there's this correlation between them, but it's not causative. It's and your self-value. It all damages that.
It's a slippery slope, right?
Yeah.
And you don't realize you're starting to cater to your audience and not yourself. It's these are like, oh, I'm doing this because I know it's a popular subject, so I'm going to paint it. And you just don't really know. You're making these little step backs. So, and then creating something so personal, like the smallest little negative comment is going to affect your confidence and your insecurity.
And that's all you think about. You've got
it's just
1,000
that
great
one.
ones, and then it's this is awful.
Right.
I hate
negativity bias.
I think it's kind of ingrained in us, like in our formative years in school, because your value in what you're creating is always judged by your teacher. It's someone else. It's not based on what you feel about it. And so, like growing up, I feel like you have that happen for so many years that when you're out in the real world, you're still putting that value on. Are these other people appreciating this instead of do I feel good about what I'm doing?
Yeah.
I think that's part of growing up too, is realizing I have to do something because I feel it's right and because it feels valuable to me, not because of what anyone else says. Because someone's always going to disapprove or dislike or be having a bad day or whatever.
Yeah.
And that sort of structure, like, Yumi has all this structure to her life. And so, I think we all probably knew somebody in university who grew up with all that structure, and then they get out in the real world and they just have the freedom and they go a little hog wild with it, And so that's also sort of a interesting thing there too.
Yeah. Structure and freedom and the balance. Like really, when it comes down to it, this whole book is is the same thing that life is all about. It's all about balance in one way or another. Balance between freedom and, structure, balance between creation and people who appreciate that creation. I don't know, all kinds of stuff. So when you guys get all that figured out, can you let me know how to create balance in your life?
Yeah, no, I will.
One of the things I liked at the very end, you got to talk about the kiss. There's a great picture of it too, and one of the beefs that I had with traditional romance novels is that everybody's great kissers, in all these romance novels. Doesn't matter how much experience they've had. They don't ever talk about a mediocre kiss or a really horrible. Well, sometimes they're really horrible kisses, but that's early in the story before the two people have, And so I love that except the kiss, the first kiss of Yumi and Painter, and then that said, it wasn't a very good kiss. That just made me laugh. But how could they be expected? They'd never had any kind of, like he says, their previous brushes with romance involve some particularly aspirational daydreams. And then because he's Brandon and he has this knack of putting something profound into something silly, he talks about a kiss doesn't need to be good to be valuable. It's not the thing, it's who you share it with.
I actually went and showed my wife that line when I read it on the plane.
And things only have the value we give to them. And likewise, actions can be worth whatever we decide them to be worth. And so to these two, that kiss was priceless. Yeah. I cried at the end of that. But that's really thought-provoking. Things only have the value we give to them. And actions can be worth whatever we decide that they're worth. And I think that's something I've thought a lot about with art, because if you think about the intrinsic value and the, perceived value of things, but no one would say of a piece of art that has no value. Something about that speaks to us as humans, and we give it value. So I don't know. It made me think as I was looking at things and thinking, what do I value, and why do I value this?
It's like the whole book is kind of about uppercase connection, but it's also about lowercase connection too. And the lowercase connection between them, you could go have a wonderful experience. You could go to a really nice restaurant, right? But it's like the person that you're there with is what makes it worth doing. It's what makes it enjoyable. And so I thought that was, a really wonderful, poignant way of looking at the human experience, where it's like, we're here for each other. We're not here to do anything else. We're just, sacks of flesh put on this earth to interact with each other, right? And it when you put it that way, it doesn't sound beautiful, but it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
To piggyback off of that, there is a quote that happens later on in the story. I'm going to try to remember it. It's a line where he says, the true hero is the ideal representation of the person you have in your mind that aspires you to be a better person. And I really love that notion, and I think it should be vocalized more. You shouldn't be giving so much pressure and responsibility on this individual, and you need to differentiate between the two. It's the person you're creating in your mind, and we're all human. We're multifaceted and we have flaws, so it should be the ideal version needs to be separated from the person themselves.
I love that.
And if you can give value to actions, then you can say, I failed. I did something really bad there, but not let it define you and not let it destroy you. Say there's value in trying again. There's value in learning and growing and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, but really what I wanted to do with this was talk more about how does a book affect people? Because I think that's the value I perceive in reading
that's awesome.
is what does it teach you about yourself, and what does it teach you about your interactions with other people? And
I mean, we've got this whole line, this whole part at the end in the epilogue is like it's Hoyd, but it's Sanderson writing, and the messaging here absolutely resonates with me, and it just says like, why do we tell stories? They are a universal human experience. Stories explain us. Sad stories, exultant stories, didactic morality stories, frivolous yarns that paradoxically carry too much meaning, we need stories, you know. And I think that that's just so true, you know. Even when we're living and just living our lives, we think about ourselves, we think about histories and our cultures in terms of stories. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And so I love a story that's kind of a love letter to that, you know.
We've talked a lot about how beautiful this story is, but very briefly, can we talk about how horrifying like the beginning is when they're talking about like what happened with the shroud and there were no bones and words scratched onto a cave.
Yeah.
Who is this man writing this story?
Yeah,
right?
he's kind of freaky.
That's not my Brandon. No. Oh my gosh,
he's in
it's
there.
terrifying.
That's what kind of impressed me the most, though, because these
Yeah.
secret projects, we knew that he was writing in styles that he wasn't used to writing in. And so, I mean, Brandon's an excellent writer, so I expected to love them, but I didn't expect them to be this incredible. Like, for him to be able to branch into something he's not super comfortable with and then make it, like, my second favorite Cosmere book of all time. Like, it was just mind-blowing to me.
Yeah.
Oh, one more detail. I didn't even notice this till like the final chapter or the epilogue. I don't know when you guys noticed it. Maybe I'm blind. But every single chapter adds a new rock to the stacks, which is why you go to the start of the book.
How did I not know?
And there's like either none or there's only barely a few of them. And then at the end, you've got a giant like stack of them.
Oh, that's so good.
That's so cool.
I know, right?
And did you notice that because one of the things we had to find a special printer that can do 3-color for this book because most books are only 2-color or, you know, just black and white. But we wanted 3-color, obviously. And if you look at the beginnings of the chapters, the Yumi chapters start with pink and the painter chapters start with blue. But when you get to the epilogue,
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
it's
awesome.
got both of them.
That's beautiful.
so cool.
Yeah, I didn't know any of that was in there because I read it on
Didn't
Kindle.
notice that.
And it's got the bamboo in there with it. Oh,
And the
Does the
rocks
bamboo
only
grow?
stack in Yumi's chapters. That's so cool.
And it's it.
My mind is blown. How did I not notice that?
yeah.
Well, I didn't notice it till the end. I was.
But you were reading on Kindle, to be fair. I read this. Like, I feel like I should have noticed that.
See, I just inhale it.
Yeah.
And then I have to, that's why I love discussing books.
The
because
bamboo
then I
grows.
get to
You
really.
see all the things from other people that you didn't notice yourself, which is so fun.
Oh, I don't think the bamboo grows. Does it?
It kept growing and
No, it does
disappearing
grow.
a couple of
in the
times.
painter chapters?
Yeah, it grows. Yeah, look. That detail up there isn't here. And that detail there isn't there.
Mind blown.
And I don't know if this was an Isaac thing or an Aaliyah thing or a Brandon thing or all of them together, but that's one of the things Brandon really likes to do is that everything is self-referential. You know, here's this story about this thing, but the visuals support that as well. And
Tran, you were really excited to get to the end, and you saw Final Fantasy was an inspiration.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Final Fantasy, and I didn't know Brandon Sanderson was a fan, so I was like, oh, you're really cool, but here's some more cool points.
It was kind of interesting too that that's part of where it came from is like that's what he took from Final Fantasy was he was like people doing cool things as a profession, you know. Painter's just like a witcher, right? He's an exterminator for you know, gun for hire almost. So that was kind of cool too.
thank you for joining us for this book club of Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. Brandon wrote this book for me and dedicated it to me, which I cried when I saw that. And in the postscript, he says that he wrote this story as a gift for me, one that we're both pleased that you now get to share. So we're so glad that you've joined us for this book club and that everyone has shared their insights and their experiences. And we hope that you will continue to enjoy Yumi and the Nightmare Painter.
So we got a copy of Yumi signed by everyone who was involved in the book club, and we want to give that away. So if you go look at the pinned comment below, you'll find out how you can win that book. We'll announce the winners on my weekly update in an upcoming weekly update. So go check that out.